Rembrandt's painting of the Night Watch has been seen by Gerard Douw, Ferdinand Bol, Karel Fabritius, Leendert van Beieren, Jacob van Dorsten, Samuel van Hoogstraat, Abraham Furnerius, Bernard Keil, Christoph Paudis, Johan Ulrich Meyer, Hendrik van Aardenburg, Frans Bach.
This building is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, Holland, the home of the prime collection of Dutch painting.
Joris Dirks, Reinier Engelen, Jan Visser, Isaac de Joudenvliet, Govert Flink, Gerbrand
The
van
Rijksmuseum is currently the scene of a shooting. The relevant authorities should investigate.
Where did the bullet go?
I accuse you, gentlemen, of murder.
They shot Hasselberg! Someone shot Hasselberg!
A man is dead, shot through the right eye. His name is Captain Piers Hasselberg, and he commanded the 13th Company of the Amsterdam Militia. Who killed him? In what circumstances? Is it murder? And if it was, who were the killers? What was the motive? What is the evidence? Who are the suspects? There are a large number of participants in this drama. Soldiers, officers, merchants, traders, painters, lovers, wives, mistresses, servants, orphans, children. What are their connections to the murder? What are their relationships to the murdered man? Where is it best to start our investigation? The Night Watch by Rembrandt van Rijn, painted in Amsterdam in 1642. This painting is the key to the whole drama of a conspiracy and a murder. It is an indictment, not an indictment as usually occurs as a text, but as an image, an accusation, a pointed finger, a accuse, Rembrandt's accuse. It has all we require to complete our investigation of a murder, with all the necessary evidence and all the well-placed clues. It is painted by an ironic, critical, even angry and accusing Rembrandt, who is, by turns, investigator, detective, and prosecutor. Fashions in art change every generation. In this year, 2008, Rembrandt's painting of the Night Watch can be considered as the fourth most celebrated painting in the Western world. The first is undoubtedly the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. The second is The Last Supper, also by Leonardo. The third is the painted ceiling of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. And the fourth is The Night Watch by Rembrandt. All four paintings are by painters we know by their Christian names, a special honor, demonstrating and confirming our confidence and familiarity with the artist. The first three paintings are Italian and Roman Catholic, and heroic propaganda for Italy and the Roman Catholic mythology. The fourth is by a miller's son from Leiden in the Netherlands, Protestant, Republic, and democratic. Like those first three paintings, the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, and the Sistine Chapel ceiling The Night Watch has been endlessly scrutinized, examined and contemplated, and considered to be full of mysteries.
Camille Corot, Constant Dutilleux, Peter von Cornelius.
As always, history and time dilutes, exaggerates, distorts, or rearranges the context of any object and event, certainly of an image, certainly of a painting. Certainly of those significant benchmark paintings that have highlighted the ways we've been encouraged to look at the world, that have fashioned our viewpoints. We look at the world through the eyes of our image makers, and for more than 2,000 years, they have almost exclusively been painters. Most people are visually illiterate. Why should it be otherwise? We have a text-based culture. Our educational systems teach us to value text over image, which is one of the reasons why we have such an impoverished cinema. Just because you have eyes does not mean to say that you can see. From childhood, when we are persuaded to learn the alphabet, through adolescence, when we are taught to amass vocabulary and refine our word skills, to adulthood, when we never finish polishing our ability to communicate through words. Proportionately, in our culture, very few people spend as much time and patience and intelligence reading paintings as they do reading text. Our sophistications of communication are text-based in the spoken and the written word, and as a consequence, by comparison, the interpretation of the manufactured image in our culture is undernourished, ill-informed, and impoverished. Is what we see really what we see? Or do we see only what we want to see? It has been said that the image always has the last word, which is a very witty thing to say in any language, but has it really been true? After all, the word is also an image. And indeed, we receive that statement as text and not as an image. Most paintings, except for those seen in churches, were simply not seen in public until the creation of public museums in the middle of the 19th century. The Night Watch, unusually, has been on very public display from the moment the varnish was dry.
This painting went on display immediately. It was on the wall in the militia headquarters within days of being finished. Many people came to see it, talk about it, comment on it. Its unveiling had been advertised well beforehand.
Amongst thousands and thousands of viewers for a period of over 3.5 centuries, this Rembrandt painting has been looked at by the articulate and the knowledgeable and the visually trained and the visually literate. And this body of the curious have repeatedly asked questions about it. It is said that it contains many mysteries which have failed to be answered in a fully satisfactory way, individually or together, until, that is, we see the painting in a special way, and that special way is to look at it as an accusation, as a accuse, an indictment of conspiracy and murder. We will consider 30 of these possible 50 Night Watch mysteries and demonstrate their interconnected significances. 30 mysteries plus one more, 30 plus 1. And the 31st mystery is perhaps the most significant because it sets up the reasons for all the other 30. For this painting marked both the height of Rembrandt's talent, his audacity, his ambition, maybe of his bombast, his overreaching self-esteem, perhaps even of his very self-indulgent arrogance. But this painting also marked, perhaps because of those characteristics, his David challenge to the contemporary Goliaths. the start of his fall from popularity, prosperity, and contemporary fame into penury, insolvency, and disregard. What is the painting all about? What is the nature of the presentation of this image? What indeed is the content of this painting, called by us, but not by Rembrandt or his contemporaries, the Night Watch? The precedent is a long tradition, maybe over 100 years long, going back to at least the 1530s, and it is the particularly Dutch genre of the group military portrait. The Dutch provinces, seeking their independence from the Habsburg Empire, were involved in a long, drawn-out guerrilla warfare with their Spanish masters in Madrid. Many Dutch townships had a local militia, recruited from local townspeople, self-taught and self-trained, who rallied when necessary to protect themselves, their people, their property, and their city from the enemy. These various local companies organized often according to their chosen weapon of defense and attack, the crossbow, the pike, and from the late 16th century onwards, from a series of new firearms, artillery pieces developed by energetic new military technologies springing up all over Europe. These militia companies had strong local ties and identities, and they liked to have themselves painted, often in uniform, in a state of readiness, or at the very least, in a strong image situation that inspired solidarity and confidence.
Bloody burgers. Gawking and smiling, pulsing and posing. I can do better than that.
There's Benjamin. He had a most desirable wife. Dimples and curls everywhere.
He couldn't sit still. When I painted him, he had a bladder complaint. We had to keep the chamber pot by his chair.
As the Civil War conditions grew more relaxed, so did the soldiery. But it was still very prestigious to be considered a member of a militia. And the other interests of these part-time companies, soldiers, trade, finance, banking, land ownership, local politics, national politics, international politics, even the arts, began to dominate. The militia companies became more and more gentlemen's clubs. Each company was traditionally led by 5 officers: a captain, a lieutenant, a standard bearer, and at least 1, if not 2, sergeants. The militia paintings, whether painted by the local artist or by the celebrated and accomplished masters, over the years developed a format of rows of identifiable portraits, all full frontal, faces to the viewer, exhibiting their wealth and status.
I want to draw everyone beforehand. That's essential. And I'm not doing long rows of pompous faces, but anyway, I have other things to do first, and I want 9 months. Human gestation period. If it takes that long to make a baby, it will certainly take that long to make a painted army.
Rembrandt, commissioned by the Amsterdam militia of the early 1640s, chose to break with that tradition. Given that the genre is the military group portrait, what is Rembrandt's version of this genre all about? Is it a record of historical fact? Is it what is called a history painting? Is it a documentary truth? Is it a fictional reconstruction? Is it a photographic still? Is it an actuality, a tableau vivant, a frozen film frame? The Night Watch could seek an explanation through all these possibilities, but most importantly, it has to be seen as a painted piece of theatre.
Oh, desperate deed! I will bestow on thee the reward of thy treachery. Thou wanton! Blacker than the vilest pit of hell! Think'st thou self an innocent? Think'st thou self chaste? I had rather prove thee what I know thou art. Aha! Witness thus the reward of dishonor.
It is a theatrical exposition, a reconstructed theatrical drama into which Rembrandt has scrupulously painted an indictment of guilt in paint.
Your painting, Rembrandt, is a pretense, a fakery, a cheat, a dishonesty, full of impossible contradictions, unworthy of a truly intelligent man. Apart from all the other infelicities that demonstrate you did not fulfill the task asked of you, your painting, Rembrandt, is dishonest. So much so that this is not a painting at all. By its very nature, it denies being a painting. It is a work of the theater.
And if it is a carefully choreographed representation of a piece of stage theatre, we should view it as such. It has a theatrical cast of 34 characters, 16 officers, 16 men, 2 women, and a dog. All the characters are self-consciously costumed, as is characteristic of a theatre play.
You have made a frozen moment of theater. You have stopped a costume play in action. They wanted the costume, we know that, but you encouraged them. And that was to be certain that we all knew that we were at the theater. And at the theater, all things are possible, even dying of love.
And all the characters are self-consciously composed and choreographed as in a frozen moment of a theatre play.
But you have pretended that the people in your painting are not being watched. Which is the definition of an actor? An actor is a person who has been trained to pretend he is not being watched. So, all the people in your paintings are all actors? Not real people at all?
And they are lit as in a transitory moment of a theatre play, arranged on a shallow stage, with all the characters facing front, keyed into that outstretched hand in the center of the picture, inviting us, the audience in the auditorium, to enter into a theatrical drama.
All the world's a stage, eh, Rembrandt? You're going to put us all on a stage in your painting?
Why the triumphal arch? It is not a usual feature at all in Dutch militia paintings. Though we might agree that the Rembrandt Night Watch stage is a deliberately designed artificial space, no scenic design is without geographical reference in the world. Rembrandt is painting this painting primarily for an Amsterdam audience. They would be looking for that reference, perhaps universally, and maybe locally. Universally, in that image of the triumphal arch, employed frequently enough in heroic Italian painting. The heroic arch is a foreign idea, a Roman idea, an Italian idea. So, to celebrate the idea of victory, a victorious company build a victory arch. How about triumphal arches locally? In Amsterdam? Amsterdam was a city of wood and brick with few buildings higher than 4 stories. Here we have a stone building, at the very least an imitation stone building. It's easier to build arches in stone rather than in brick. There is a strong local precedent, and none sharper and brighter in the Amsterdam memory than a very recent triumphal visit, 4 years before, in 1638. A very memorable event when Amsterdam was full of triumphal ceremonial arches, flags, flying bunting, and companies of marching Amsterdam militia. The Victory arches were erected for the occasion and therefore were temporary constructions, designed and built of wood and painted to imitate stone. Is Rembrandt making a special point here that Amsterdam and the Amsterdam militia are involved in a piece of municipal fakery?
I insist we wear these. I'm paying, for God's sake.
This, wrong colour, too dull, and no shine.
If they're good enough for the Queen of France, they're good enough for me, and should be good enough for you.
And the event for this fakery and the imitation stone Victory arch is the visit of Marie de Medici to Amsterdam. The name Medici is surely related to ideas of money. The Medici were the great banking family of the old city of Florence, a name certainly resonant in the new city of money, Amsterdam, the Florence of the North. Marie de Medici had been married to the King of France, Henry IV. After 10 years of a troubled regency, her son, Louis XIII, ruled in his own right, and she was ousted. As the former exiled regent of France, she traveled around Europe looking for money and sustenance, and she came on a right royal visit to the new city of money, Amsterdam. A tumultuous visit, full of a little republic being honored by a queen mother of France. It meant status, honor, and kudos, especially to her local accompanying guard of honor, who were, of course, after much jealous jockeying for this particular position of honor, the 2nd Precinct Cloveners Company of the Amsterdam Musketeers. And they were led by Captain Piers Hasselberg and his lieutenant, Piers Egremont. French champions settled in Holland from persecuted Protestant Huguenot French stock 2 generations before.
Egremont was a gracious womanizer. Handsome, you can see that. Perhaps over gallant. He worked hard at it, but he never took, as far as I can see, what he was not offered. It is true he certainly was loved by the ladies, above and below stairs.
Which brings us to the deceased Hasselberg. What was your relationship to the deceased?
I met him in the Van Bell fields on the day we witnessed the militia company at target practice. The day Rembrandt was hit in the face by an exploding musket. And the last time I saw him, if you don't count his corpse at his funeral, was in our house when Rembrandt was thinking of painting a nativity with Titus as Christ child.
Lieutenant Egremont was accused by Jonkind and Clement and Floris Banning-Cock, all reputable officers, of being the central figure associated with the murder of Captain Hasselberg. Do we believe the word of your husband against theirs?
You know that I believe my husband.
No doubts?
Absolutely not. No doubts.
A very pleased Marie de Medici suggested that the Cloveners Company of Amsterdam Musketeers, led so amicably by soldiers of French stock, ought to have themselves painted by a great French-speaking, in fact, multilingual-speaking painter, Peter Paul Rubens, no less, who had flattered her in a most exorbitant, extraordinary way, in fact, in a frieze of mighty, heroic paintings that distinguished her as a classical heroine in a grand, monarchical drama without end. Certainly with excessive amounts of nudity, allegory, and theatrical drama. On her behalf, Captain Hasselberg and his entire company received gifts and accumulating honor and status, and could only wish that such memorable events could be repeated again. Rubens, the most courtly Roman Catholic painter, was politically not at all suitable. The mystery of why, when, and how the Night Watch is as it is can be put down to Marie de Medici's championship of Rubens. What Roman Catholic Flemish Rubens could do heroically for France, Protestant Dutch Rembrandt might well do heroically for Holland. Then the much-desired prospect of a new event to honor another ex-Medici heroine turned up. There was to be a new royal visit to Amsterdam with possibly even greater prize. This princess, too, was a Medici on her mother's side. The visit of the Princess Mary Stuart, daughter of the incumbent British King Charles I, who was having serious trouble with his parliament about money and privilege and religion. The Princess Mary Stuart was very young and was the wife, in an as yet unconsummated marriage, to the heir of the Dutch House of Orange, Prince William.
When monarchies are in trouble, they send their females begging.
The English mission, no less, was to pawn the English crown jewels to further the monarchical interests of Charles I in securing his kingdom against his parliament in what looked like a coming civil war in England.
The King of England's pawn shop deal. Crown jewels going back to Edward the Confessor and William the Conqueror. We're all in on this deal. Well, most of us are in on this deal. The captain and the lieutenant aren't.
Access to the English crown jewels was a superlative opportunity. At the very least, to secure potential pawnbrokers and negotiators an enormous rate of financial interest. And since most were certain, in the optimistic little Dutch Republic, who thought all Europe should be Republican, that King Charles I of England would lose against his parliament. Then those very, very valuable English assets would be forfeited to the Dutch, most particularly to the moneylenders of Amsterdam. Opportunity for some skullduggery was rampant. If the Amsterdam Musketeer Company could gain access to the new English visitors and be their close guarding company of honor, situating them in a most ambitious negotiating position, the prospect of riches and privilege was exceedingly likely.
How would it have been if you'd been obliged to paint the portrait of a one-eyed captain of the militia? Lying on his back, in a coffin, dressed like a grandmother in bed?
The honest, Frenchified Dutch Captain Hasselberg had to go.
Sadness to meet on such an occasion.
And the Anglophile Dutch military captain Banning Kock and his lieutenant Willem van Ruitenberg should take over the reins of the Amsterdam Musketeer Militia Company. And this is exactly what happened. Initially, the plan was to create an adjustment in the command by moving Captain Hasselberg and Lieutenant Egremont to new military positions in Utrecht. But the impatience of the conspirators and the need for speedy action lay them open to the encouragement of the two Banning-Kock relatives, Floris and Clement.
I have never met a painter before.
For a swifter and more violent action. Assassination disguised as a military accident. Why is this painting called The Night Watch? Is this, in fact, a nighttime scene? The title, The Night Watch, was given to the painting around 1715, when a municipal police force was instituted in Amsterdam to protect the citizens against nocturnal criminal activity. The members of this force were called the Night Watch, and they prowled the nighttime streets with weapons and torches. The general darkness of the painting, which had been commented on as soon as the painting went on display, lit by exaggerated pools of what were considered to be artificial light, coupled by the aging and gradual darkening of the painting, identified it with the activities of this New Amsterdam police force and gave rise to the familiar title. There is no reason to consider, in fact, that this is a nighttime painting, though Rembrandt, without pursuing entirely new areas of painterly investigation, may have deliberately given the painting a sinister air in keeping with his purposes to create a drama of intrigue, conspiracy, and murder. And hereby lies so much of the painting's fascination and power and novelty.
Some made remarks about how dark the painting was.
But that in itself was a comment on the theatrical lighting they had so recently witnessed on the stage.
Rembrandt's reputation as a master of light, lighting effects, and chiaroscuro is deservedly well known. He is the chronological fourth in a line of great European painters who, as masters of the 17th century High Baroque, investigated artificial light. Caravaggio, Rubens, Rembrandt, and Velázquez. One could make out a case that cinema began with these four painters. These are the first painters who are seriously and consistently interested in the painting of artificial light. And this is partly to do with two, not inventions exactly, but massive improvements in traditional technologies. The vast improvement in the technology of the candle, and the vast improvement in the production of the mirror. The candle and the mirror could be a poetic description of cinema, out of darkness into the light. Up until the 1550s, by far most of the world went to bed at sunset and got up at dawn. Artificial light was expensive. Only the aristocracy and the church could afford it. Think of how many bees it takes to make a wax candle. Then around the end of the 16th century, they reinvented the tallow candle in Northern Europe. And the start of the 24-hour light was on its long journey to now, when the artificial suns never set around the globe. Daylight, and therefore curiously time itself, expanded. The new artificial light could be afforded by the bourgeoisie, even the richer proletariat. The refined tallow candles were smoky, smelly, did not last very long. The wicks constantly needed trimming, but the passage from the supper table to the bed, because there probably wasn't a place called a bedroom, could be essayed without any more stubbing your toe in the dark. You could see one another when you undressed. You could see the shadows and the glooms. You could, in fact, create them, engineering the highlights and the half-lights. And painters did just that. A whole new visible world opened up, and painters of talent and repute exploited that world to the full. And this is exactly what Rembrandt does in The Night Watch. Multiple light sources, the possibility of more than one sun in the sky, manipulating the shadows and reflections, the light bounce and the highlights. If you trace back light sources, you're going to be disappointed if you want solar logic. But that is a painter's license. And we give it to them freely if we want drama and excitement and fantasy and magic.
It's so goddamn dark you can't see anything anyway.
Bring on some candles.
You're trying to be Italian on us, are you, Rembrandt?
A great deal of this painterly magic was Italian. All self-respecting Dutch painters, sooner or later, went to Italy to look, study, and learn, and also to acquire a necessary aura of painterly authentication.
And if you haven't been to Italy, what the do you know about Italian paintings anyway?
Rembrandt certainly respected, copied, admired, and emulated the painters of Italy, but he never went there. In reply to the taunts of being a provincial stay-at-home, he replied, "Why should I go to Italy if Italy can come to me?" Which has, in the computer information age, a very modern ring. But whereas our accessibility is available at the push of a computer button, his was possible via the print trade. And the print trade in Italian masters was blooming, making Italian painting familiar all over Northern Europe in the print markets of Antwerp, Utrecht, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam. The Night Watch is a history painting in the grand Italian tradition. Why? Well, certainly to attain for it a credence, a regard for status in the grand manner, but not necessarily to admire that tradition, but to mock it.
Are you being satirical, von Reiner? Is this a satire?
Here is his abduction of Persephone, surely an image of some satirical intention. And his abduction of Europa, where the event is deliberately trivialized in the presence of silly women who can only scream. Here is his Diana and Actaeon, combined with the discovery of Callisto's pregnancy. He's mocking the whole rather silly sexual drama of the original stories. Women seen naked by a trespassing male revengefully turn him into a stag who's pulled down by his dogs. Woman discovered to be adulterously pregnant by virgins in the service of Diana. These are two classical stories of dubious, legitimized voyeurism, the nature of their dubious legitimization mocked by Rembrandt by numerous wry observations. And here is the boy Ganymede, abducted by Jupiter, disguised as an eagle to become a catamite on Mount Olympus. Drawing much excessive attention to buttocks and penis, but then satirizing the sexual desire with a very young age, the bawling, screwed-up, ugly face, the dribbling urine, and the whole general indignity. Desire flies away, and those who have such desires are mocked. Satire and mockery in the Rembrandt armory is not new, and he uses them again in The Night Watch. There is another and further Italian point to be made. Italy in the 16th and 17th century is the land of sudden treachery, vicious assassination, profound betrayal, spiteful revenge, and political violence.
I accuse you, gentlemen, of murder.
North European playwrights, like Shakespeare and Webster, set their dramas of treachery and revenge in Verona, Venice, Florence, Malfi, and Rome. Rembrandt, satirically pastiching the Italian style and manner of picture-making in his endeavor to demonstrate treachery and conspiracy and murder in Holland, is suggesting that Amsterdam has adopted the Italian politics of sudden assassination.
And a republic tempered by assassination is not the Dutch way. We do not assassinate like this, like Italians, like Romans. Or do we? Will we?
And if Holland has not already accomplished that, as he believes, with the murder of Hasselberg, will it become a Dutch habit? Might we suggest that Rembrandt was being prophetic and making an apocryphal reference to the savage assassinations of the brothers de Witt in The Hague in 1672, and even, perhaps, the murder of Pim Fortuyn in 2002 in a media park in Hilversum, and much closer to home, the assassination of Theo van Gogh in 2004 in the streets of Amsterdam. Rembrandt may have received the commission in late 1640 in association with Captain Hasselberg and his Lieutenant Egremont, brokered, most certainly, by Rembrandt's dealer, Hendrik Uhlenberg.
If I benefit, and it's for me to say how and to find out, you could benefit too. Push up your price.
Inclusive or exclusive of your fee?
Well, I obviously don't expect extras from you. Those days are over, I think. I feel, I know, I'm sure.
Then the situation of the commission completely changed when Hasselberg was murdered, and his lieutenant Egremont went into hiding, accused of being responsible for his death by permitting a military accident to occur due to his irresponsibility. The new commissioners, led by the Banningcock family, were keen to create a seamless continuity to help conceal their conspiracy. And after some show of hesitation, they renewed their contract with Rembrandt. The standard-bearer Vischer was certainly in on the plot, as were Kemp and Engelen and de Roy, and in various degrees of knowingness and complicity, all the other officers and most of the inner circle of men. Certainly backed by the Banningcock family, whose family connections in Amsterdam were very strong, dominated by Banningcock's mother and aided and abetted by the de Graafs, whose head was Andreas de Graaf, probably the wealthiest man in Amsterdam in the 1640s, and certainly Banningcock's brother-in-law.
We want to ask you of your relationship to the 7 major personalities accused. Captain Franz Banningcock, Lord of Permeland, Lieutenant Reutenberg, Lord of Vlaardingen, Sergeant Deacon Rombert Kemp, Sergeant Engelen, Standard-bearer Vischer, Firing Master Martin Gale, and Ensign Horatio Aiken.
My husband was certain that everyone in the painting stands accused.
We will keep the accusations presently to those named, if we may. Captain Franz Banningcock.
Through my cousin, Hendrik van Ulenburg, I met Banningcock's servant Joachim, who paid me 50 guilders, half the fee for Banningcock's full-length portrait in the militia painting. I've spoken the slightest pleasantries with him on only 3 occasions, when he came to our house in the Breedstraat for portrait sittings.
Banningcock, Lord of Permeland, was not a lord in his own right, or through his own inheritance, but was a lord by marriage. His father-in-law, with no male issue, had been the first bearer of the title, and the family fortune of Banningcock's new wife had been made in trade and merchandising, mainly with the Middle East and spices. Banningcock is the man in black. Why is he dressed in black?
Red sash, I think. And the black suit. That's it. Good. And I think we'll have a gesture. A gesture, like a Roman officer, not Greek. Mm-hmm. There. There. And that's it. Flat sole shoes. This, I think. Oh. And the man in black.
Satan. Complete with black satanic costume, black hat, black jerkin, black breeches, black hose and black shoes, with a demoniac red-crimson sash, with even a suggestion of a demon dragon's encrusted tail between his legs. Here is a great curiosity. The painting is dominated by the 2 figures of Banningcock and Reutenberg, friends, companions in arms, captain and lieutenant, both titled. These 2 men are not so very far from being equals in military command. They were certainly not so very far from being equals in Amsterdam's social life. Banningcock is painted tall enough.
Yes, the English say the Dutch are getting taller all the time.
And that seems not to be the case, though, with little Willem, do you think?
Little? Little? You think Willem is little?
But Willem van Reutenberg is shorter, considerably shorter. So much shorter, in fact, that Willem does not even come up to Banningcock's shoulder. Both men are standing on the same level piece of ground, equally spaced from the viewer.
Legitimate painter's armory. Flatter, praise, insult, abuse, accuse.
Accuse? Are you going to do the same?
Now, the painter's art is one of legitimate license and accommodation. One could say that in the art of painting portraits, a great many portrait painters would engage in, at the very least, a little flattery. Arrange things on a canvas a little more accommodatingly than is possible in real life. But apparently not Rembrandt. Even if Willem van Ruytenberg was indeed, as they say, vertically disadvantaged, few people would be in a position to know, few would be able to compare man and painting. So who would know if Rembrandt were to paint a short man with a little more stature? Rembrandt has decidedly chosen not to do this. He has chosen to record Willem van Ruytenberg as shorter than his captain. Much shorter, in fact. Indeed, we might say he has chosen to make Willem indeed a shorty.
Vladingen! 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 Where is Vladingen? Henrika? Do you know? Vladingen? Who are you? Where are you? Wherefore art thou, Vladingen?
The whole painting, in a significant way, is centered around the single gesture of Banning Cock offering his hand to us, his audience. Are the implications greater than signifying a desire for his company to move forward?
That's not Banning Cock's hand, is it? It looks like it doesn't belong to the arm.
Is that an observation or a criticism? But you're right, it's not his hand. That belongs to Piers Hasselberg.
Although much art historian scholarship has been made of that hand, scholarship that has been mocked by the commentator who suggested, indeed, that Banning Cock is simply holding out his hand to see if it was raining, there is something a little unconvincing about it. It's draftsmanship, the way it issues without absolute conviction from the black suit. Is it indeed because it is not Banning Cock's hand at all, but Hasselberg's? A preparatory leftover from the significance of the first occupier of that position. Is Rembrandt trying to remind us of something? It is, after all, a left hand that makes the gesture, the sinister hand, from the Latin sinister for left. Only a dead man offers his left hand for a handshake. Here is another complicated observation. Whilst Banning Cock offers his left hand to us, the audience, and has a gloved right hand, the glove he carries so gingerly in his right gloved hand, as though it might be something very unpleasant, is not a left-handed glove, as you should imagine to think it ought to be, but a right-handed glove. There is an explanation that offers a whole new slant on the painting of the Night Watch and its significance. 5 years earlier, in 1637, Rembrandt had, on commission, painted a full-length portrait of Andreas de Graaf, foremost citizen of Amsterdam and very wealthy.
There is my brother-in-law, Andreas de Graaf, to remember. That business of the return painting wasn't very good, was it, Rembrandt? We understood he threw the glove at you, so to speak. A challenge, so to speak. Well, he tends to be touchy and tetchy, I suppose.
It's not too late for you to change your mind. And I would hate to have to sue you for non-payment, like your brother-in-law, who, you must know, lost his case.
Andreas de Graaf had apparently refused to accept and pay for the painting. There is a tradition that it was Andreas de Graaf's wife who made him refuse it, since it seemed to depict Andreas as red-cheeked, unsteady and drunk, with unfocused eyes. And people in the know identified the heavily nail-studded door and the stone portrait of a Roman as the location for a well-known hostelry frequented by men of business who enjoyed a drink and sometimes other favours supplied there. Had Rembrandt been a little ironic, if not a little cynical? Rembrandt had duly been paid, and he returned the painting to Andreas de Graaf and had added something as a literal footnote thrown down at Andreas's feet, nothing less than a right-handed challenge glove. Banning Koch, it seems, had been forced, on Andreas de Graaf's insistence, to pick up that challenge glove and follow through what that picking up gesture had meant. He, Banning Koch, now had to fight Rembrandt in something like personal combat. It was all for the sake of family honor, because Andreas de Graaf and Banning Koch were brothers-in-law. A visitor to the Rijksmuseum, apparently understanding something of Rembrandt's meaning in the Night Watch painting, and disturbed and incensed by its implications, took a kitchen knife from his raincoat pocket and heavily scored the Night Watch canvas. He recognized Captain Banning Koch to be Satan in the act of luring Christ into the underworld. The activity relates to an event recorded in the Golden Legend, the medieval book of biblical apocrypha, an event known as the harrowing of hell. Between Christ's crucifixion and his descent from the cross, both events which Rembrandt painted, taking advantage of Christ's death and Christ's denial of his Father, "Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" Satan took Christ down into hell in the hope of keeping him there in subjugation, a revenge on God, his Father. Banning Koch as Satan, the man in black, is dressed as a civilian, though he is really only a citizen in disguise, hiding his iron military gorget beneath his lace collar. No spurs, no breastplate. Whilst Willem as Christ is undisguisably a soldier, the soldier who was the risen Christ, resplendent in white and yellow and cream. And if these accusations are not sufficient, consider that Banning Koch offering his hand to you, his audience. And he also, with the same left hand, is about to lead Christ to hell. And the fingers of that left hand have no fingernails. Is that not a sure and certain sign of Banning Koch's demoniac nature? William van Ruytenberg, Lord of Lardingen, carries a weapon. It is technically called a partisan, essentially a spear used for thrusting and jabbing, and in dire need, throwing, though the weapon looks heavy, and once thrown, and one imagines not thrown very far, not easily recoverable in the chaos of battle. We cannot but notice how it is positioned, aligned indeed exactly with Willem's genitals. The weapon's design suggests an erect phallus, and with its side pieces it also intimates testicles. Maybe even the tassels imply pubic hair. Once viewed in this fashion, and with this interpretation, it is difficult to see the item otherwise. Rembrandt, eminently accomplished, perfectly talented to paint this item exactly how and where he wanted to, higher, lower, to the left, or to the right, and still perfectly fulfill notions of illusionistic reality, chose to paint it exactly where he has, and done so surely significantly to make a point of William's excessive phallic exhibitionism, a painted demonstration of his womanizing.
What have you got here? Oh, no, listen.
It is interesting that this weapon, the partisan, was no longer used in conflict on the battlefield, but was, by 1642, merely ceremonial. It was an antique, a vestige of its former purpose. Is Rembrandt implying that Willem van Ruytenberg, with his bought-title lordship and his diminutive stature and his fancy exhibitionist uniform, the possessor of an oversized, aggressive phallic apparatus of no longer purposeful significance? X-rays of the picture demonstrate that Rembrandt had 3 attempts at painting this partisan, forever making it longer and longer, suggesting a need to make a stronger and yet stronger satirical point. If we take a look at the shadow of Banning Cock's left hand, his ungloved, naked left hand, his sinister hand, which is cast on the body of his lieutenant, we can readily see that it falls on his lower belly, above his genitals. If the hand does not indicate its own purpose and desire, may not its shadow, its surrogate, do so? Is this a comment by Rembrandt of Banning Cock's homosexual desire for his companion? And indeed, is the significance of the size, shape and position of Van Ruytenberg's partisan a painted demonstration of Van Ruytenberg's return anatomical response to Banning Cock's desire? With either reading, Rembrandt's desire to denigrate the pair cannot go unnoticed.
Company forward! Lead out the men!
Much has been made of Rembrandt's ability in the medium of the visual to suggest the medium of sound. In a commissioned painting Rembrandt completed 2 years before the Night Watch of a double portrait of the Mennonite preacher Cornelis Anslo and his wife, he drew a special attention to the celebrated powers of the preacher to excite and move his listeners by preaching, making manifest the spoken word, moving his audience by his oratory. This ability and its relevant celebrated reputation is advertised in this painting to draw our attention to what we can supposedly hear.
Paintings are normally silent. However, we can give this painting, this picture, this image, sound. There is, of course, another sound.
There is a purpose in all this, relevant to his depiction of conspiracy and murder. Rembrandt is encouraging us to listen. Fire! And when we listen, we can at once understand why we've been asked to. For the painting's loudest, most dominant sound is a gunshot.
A musket shot.
There is much to suggest that Rembrandt was satirizing the military pretensions of his would-be burgher soldiers.
Apparently, I'm not supposed to show the enemy how to load and fire the new muskets. So, I'm painting the muskets upside down.
For 3 of his musketeers, Rembrandt took as a model 3 prints published in an illustrated military gazette called The Exercise of Arms, reckoned to be one of the most famous books of the whole 17th century, a handbook of weapons and artillery that had been around since 1607, though the original drawings had been completed in 1597 and the book's publication delayed due to fears of national security lest the enemy learn too many Dutch military secrets. Thus, the quoted illustrations would be very well known, especially to aspiring soldiers of the Amsterdam burgher militia companies. Quoting such a source, Rembrandt would be making several points to the Night Watch Banning Cocks and their comrades. He would be telling them that his research into their business was serious, and reminding them of the illustrious past of the Amsterdam militia and commentating on their ability to live up to such standards. How about this third man? The man who pulls the trigger, that fires the musket, that kills Hasselberg. The shooter, the man whose face and therefore identity is concealed.
And fire. So you see that without a musket stand, the aimer is in full control of the trajectory of the bullet. So, in order for this to work, the aimer, let's say Gale or Yonkin, has to be in close association with the lieutenant who shouts the orders to fire.
Someone shot Hasselberg in the eye. They shot him through the right eye, into his brain. He's dead!
Who is this soldier with the concealed face we are not supposed to see? By his stature, he's young, an adolescent, well-dressed, well-turned out. A novice with ambitions to become a perfect soldier, a perfect musketeer. And Ensign Horatio Aiken.
If I had heard about him, I never remembered who he was. Apart from the figure in the painting, the adolescent with a smart uniform, a brass helmet and oak leaves attached. No face, and therefore impossible to know who he was by seeing his visual identity. Which was Rembrandt's whole point. So many portrait faces in that painting that not to paint a portrait face was a comment in itself. Something we were immediately drawn to.
His proximity in the painting to the other two young people suggests he might identify with them.
Fired by a 12-year-old boy, too young to be a soldier.
Well, it could be Horatio Aiken. He's from the orphanage. He was out that afternoon shooting, the afternoon it was pouring with rain. And Marita said he came back wringing wet and shivering and wouldn't talk. Then Dirk came in later and told everyone that Hasselberg was dead. And Horatio told him to shut up and then locked himself in the privy.
The boy was an innocent drawn into the affair. The dupe who pulled the trigger. The innocent, ignorant trigger puller, hardly to be blamed. Even by the most persistent and the most cynical.
We cannot blame Horatio. He was planted.
The plotters know who he is, and now I can show so do we. We can include him in the picture, not by using his face, but by using his name. Horatio Aiken. Oak. Oak leaves.
What of Yonkind, the so-called aimer, placed as a co-conspirator by Rembrandt in the middle of the major conspirators Banning Koch and Willem van Ruytenberg, the three of them making a guilty triangle? What is that gesture of the gloved hand? The only gesture that recognizes that anyone, in fact, in the whole painting ever heard or observed or considered that fearful musket shot with the flaming powder bursting forth from the barrel. Surely it is a hand action that is, or has just, a half a second ago, been aiming the direction of the barrel of that musket.
Fire. Clear.
You've forgotten the order to aim. Who's doing the aiming?
Well, surely the shooter aims his own musket, no?
You would have thought so.
Not without a musket stand.
So, what have we been describing? The two major conspirators, Banning Koch and van Ruytenberg, have set up a situation for a supposed military accident, where Yonkin, in the absence of the Lieutenant Egremont, who would be responsible for giving any firing orders, tips the barrel of the musket fired by the blackmailed novice Horatio Aiken to kill Captain Hasselberg with a bullet through the right eye. There are two women in this painting. What are they doing there in a crowd of 32 men and a dog? The first female is visually unavoidable, brightly illuminated, dressed in a glowing yellow dress. Her head caught in a direct light, her dark pupils contrasting with the pale white and pink of her face. Far less clearly, in fact, so much far less clearly, the very ambiguity might seem to draw attention to itself, is a companion. She can certainly be made out if you look closely. There's a right ear, blonde hair, and a blue dress. Enough painted evidence to presume we're looking at a female. This might not be such a strange observation, considering some have thought that the girl in the yellow dress is, in fact, a male dwarf. Some have certainly doubted this creature to be female at all, finding her indeed first ugly and then old. How old is open to question.
I'm 9 now. Well, 9 going on 10. Perhaps 11. I could be 12. Maybe even older. Horatio says that's what excites them. Am I a woman or am I still a girl? What do you think?
Some observers have suggested that Rembrandt painted a transvestite dwarf in a complex allusion to the Spanish paintings of dwarfs in the royal Habsburg household of Philip IV, as painted by Velázquez. Dwarfs in Spanish painting. Velázquez, Ribera, Zurbarán. There is certainly evidence that Rembrandt saw Velázquez prints. Why would Rembrandt want to make such a reference? Well, he might have wanted his audience to know that he'd been looking at such a reputed painter as Velázquez, though Velázquez was a member of the enemy party of Spain, as indeed was Rubens, the other great hero. Velázquez, older than Rembrandt by 7 years, was an admired painter, a consideration taking him perhaps amongst the fraternity of painters way above politics. And he had made himself a courtier, as indeed had Rubens. We know that Rembrandt had ambitions to be a court painter, and we know that Rembrandt had painted himself, indeed, as a courtier. Was this another demonstration of the proof he could paint anything, if it was indeed to be asked of him? There is much talk of this female creature being a mascot.
I'm in the painting to remind everyone of my father's hypocrisy and evil. Many said later that I was there just as a mascot.
But what sort of mascot was that?
There's absolutely no precedent in over 50 previous Dutch militia paintings of there ever being a mascot present. No young females, no goats, monkeys, rabbits, no mascot that might remotely be familiar, for example, from any football team. These two females boldly, even accusingly painted incongruously in a body of tall men and walking, if not running, in a contrary direction to everyone else, are part of Rembrandt's accusation. Their names are Marijke and Marita, both the illegitimate daughters of Rombout Kemp.
We are neighbours in the Breestraat. How about making a contribution to the orphanage? We have many new children, orphaned by the Spanish wars.
Then I think they must all be touching 30.
Marijke and Marita are commonly used as names for country girls and for cows. Certainly not names chosen by the well-born and hardly by the bourgeoisie. Both are derived from Maria, Mary, strongly Roman Catholic. So, Roman Catholic, underprivileged, and probably illiterate country waifs. Orphans? Bastards. Rembrandt put this underprivileged country girl orphan in a splendid dress from his property box. To show who and to signify what? Certainly to demonstrate the calumnies of the orphanage. Seen in later years as an element of Dutch life that appears sympathetic to the plight of the orphan, orphanages were not necessarily the places of charitable welfare they might have a reputation of being. They certainly were a source for cheap labor. For females, cheap domestic work as servants, and it seems in some cases for worse, in prostitution, even child prostitution.
The men come to the orphanage, and some of the older girls, Judith, she's about 13, are taken to the bedroom overlooking the garden. And they stay there for an hour or so. I have stood in the gallery and watched. There is some laughter, it's true, but mostly it's all done very quietly, and then there are tears. But Judith often comes back with some flowers or a new ribbon. And once, she was given a Passover cake which she shared with me. And once, my father gave her a silver coin. He painted Marita deliberately with her face hidden. Because she hated her scarred face. But he got me to hold the coffee pot as a reference to the hot boiling water that Kemp threw in Marita's face that scarred her so badly.
Marita's face is hidden. What are these hidden Rembrandt faces, Horatio and Marita? Were they in some way joined in some act of calumny? Was she ashamed to show her face? Was it a modesty or a disguise? Or a consideration taken by Rembrandt alone? Or was it requested by Marita herself?
They got me. I'm not a woman yet, and me to make me plead.
Did she not want to be recognized in this melee of officers and bourgeois, by whom she might have had some nefarious relationship? Why tantalize us by adding her body, but not her face and identity? Permitting her, in effect, to be there, perhaps as a witness, but not permitting her to be seen. She adds nothing conceivably to the composition, the design, the activity, the movement. There surely must be a reason why Marika is given a female companion. Hanging most prominently on the belt of the golden dress is a chicken, caught by its claws so that we can appreciate their significance.
The upturned chicken, secured so tightly about her waist, to point to her being tied to service lechery. Barnyard hen with the white chicken feathers, a symbol of surrender and deliberately bred to lay sterile eggs at the bottom of the pecking order, with her feet tied together, powerless, submissive, imprisoned so she could never ever run away. Wings clipped, laid on her back to forever service lust.
Who's the child? Oh, Marika. Kemp's illegitimate, carrying the pot of scalding coffee that ruined her sister's face. She carries the musketeer's cockerel, hanging upside down, ready for plucking and... Oh, cock-a-doodle-doo!
My neighbour's lost her shoe!
My master's lost his fiddling stick!
I doesn't know what to do!
Rembrandt's painting of the militia was cut. It is not the same painting for us as it was for Rembrandt in 1642. When it was finished, the painting was immediately put on public exhibition in the Klovener's headquarters overlooking the river Amstel that gives Amsterdam its name, and the painting must have hung facing the big windows onto the river. Then, in 1715, the painting was moved. It was taken to the new town hall on the Dam Square, and the story goes that the position decreed for its new hanging was too small. It was required to fit into a space between two doors. No especial disrespect was intended, but it was indeed cut down to fit. A slice was taken off the top, the right-hand side, off the bottom edge, and the biggest section of all, some metre and a half, was cut from the left-hand side. It is true that those who do not know of this event are not so especially underprivileged. But when you examine the painting closely, you can understand that something serious has happened to the original composition, which was carefully arranged and balanced to dramatize the accusation. The center of the gravity of the painting has traveled to the right-hand side, removing the direction of compositional guilt. Banning Cock died in 1655, but his family must have known that to cut the picture might be to their social advantage. After all, they had commissioned their own personal copy of the painting and kept it in the house to be viewed by visitors and guests. And the real reason that the large slice was removed from the left-hand side of the original painting was to disassociate themselves from the two married in-law relatives, Floris and Clement Cock.
No lice, no dogs, no crabs, no peepers.
For it was they, indeed, who had introduced extreme violence into the conspiracy to remove Captain Hasselberg. It was these two had suggested murder by shooting, disguised as a military accident, to move the impediment to the Banning Cocks from taking over the Amsterdam Company of Musketeers. Association with these two bad sheep of the family was not at all desirable. They had to go, and they were cut out of the frame, cut out of the picture. They disappeared into the gloomy vastnesses of history. They disappeared with a separated canvas which has never been found.
Here I am in my splendid uniform as an important member of this important club. I look at you and you look at me. I'm watching you and you watching me.
It has been said that the only true thing the cinema ever invented was the glance. Eye contact and the plethora of significances we can communicate with such a huge vocabulary of stares, winks and nods, blinks, smirks, smiles, grins, frowns, grimaces, and all the in-between stages and all the transitional ways of moving from one subtle glance to another underpin the multiplicitous ways of communicating subtle meaning. But not so with Rembrandt, at least not so in The Night Watch. Are we not seeing here in The Night Watch a self-conscious, deliberate wish not to make such engagements? Partly from an antipathy towards the characters he met and drew and knew, and partly so that we would make no identification by emotional transference.
Kemp ought to be castrated, the hypocritical, lecherous old wolf. Well, apparently, he's using the orphanage as a child brothel. Engelen should be booted out of the Kirchmörsel. He's buying houses in the Jordan and then burning them down again to claim the insurance. Vischer. He's gone into tobacco after saying he wouldn't and forcing down the price.
These almost expressionless faces in The Night Watch tell us virtually nothing about inner feeling, emotion. Does Banning Cock, with his ragged, untrimmed moustache, look blank and out to lunch? Does little Willem look foxy? But what about Arika, Joritz, Gale, Kemp, de Roy? Well, yes, de Roy. Of the 34 people in the painting, he is one of the two people who are looking at us, straight at us. And the other is Rembrandt himself.
All the people in your paintings are all actors, not real people at all. Yet you have got them to do things which are real, except, of course, because you knew what you were doing. Of your little portrait of yourself, you knew you were being watched. And you look at us within the old tradition of these sorts of paintings with admirable self-consciousness. You're giving yourself an old-fashioned position and responsibility in a new-fashioned painting which tries to deny that position and responsibility.
So, Rembrandt, master of all he commands, takes a position at the back of the painting. He's almost equidistant from the back of his painted action as we, the viewers, are from the front of the action. The puppet master operates from the back of the stage, maneuvering his puppets from behind for our amusement and delectation. And if we are indeed supposed to be the witnesses, and maybe even the jury that has come to view Rembrandt's accusations, then we are doubly regarded as Rembrandt's audience as he puts on a show of prosecutor, provider of evidence. What makes Rembrandt want to play a Hitchcock walk-on role? Rembrandt appears in so many of his own paintings in a walk-on part. One answer could be for sheer amusement. One answer could be that he always conveniently can be his own model, simply by looking in a mirror at his own self-portrait. But the best reason should surely be that he puts himself in his paintings as a witness. Here in The Night Watch, where Rembrandt makes a dangerous accusation with which, when Émile Zola coined that Zaccuse phrase, meant an entirely fearless identification with his accusation, Rembrandt wants to stand by his accusation and be a signed witness to it. The only character in The Night Watch, apart from Rembrandt, who looks us in the eye is this man, Jacob de Roy. A man with a feather in his hat, dressed in dark red. Is he trying to tell us something?
He keeps on saying you ought to talk to the man in the red cloak and then decide.
Who's the man in the red cloak?
He is the whistleblower, the start of the journey, the entry point to the drama, which begins from our eye contact. His eyes to our eyes. Eyes for the business of seeing and looking, which is Rembrandt's business. The key to reading the painting as an indictment. De Roy, etymologically, the king, and if you're a chess player, the Red King. Look at de Roy's face and see him related to the pointing hand of Rembrandt Kemp. Follow Kemp's pointing index finger to the conspirators and unravel the plot. He must surely be our major witness. And then the change in Rembrandt's career began to happen. The people who had once provided the backbone to his good fortune and prosperity by commissioning portraits of themselves and their wives and their relatives began to fall away. The characteristic ebullient verve and dash and grand gesture of the large painting evaporated. With these deprivations, the money situation deteriorated. Debtors began to call in their debts. Mortgage repayments on the expensive house were called in, and Rembrandt, with the assistance of Henrique and his son Titus, began to try to build equivocal financial defenses. Inventing a company that could not touch Rembrandt's remaining assets, but the plans were unsatisfactory, the authorities not sympathetic. Rembrandt had to move to a one-up and two-down suburban house in the Jordan, now a fashionable enough, gentrified, desirable area, but then almost out in the damp fields. There were auctions of property and effects. The large collection of curiosities, prints and paintings had to go. The authorities of the massive new town hall on the Dam Square, which was regarded as a new wonder of the world by the Amsterdammers, commissioned Rembrandt only to withdraw his painting deemed to be unsatisfactory. The revengeful commissioners settling into the now comfortable little Dutch Republic with its contacts around the world. Wasn't New York originally called New Amsterdam? And wasn't St. Petersburg built out of Peter the Great's Dutch experiences? Had suppressed the threat of Rembrandt's indictment, buried it. Amsterdam, for 3 generations, was the center of the economic life of the Western world. And most of that power was in the hands of the wealthy Amsterdam families, with the likes of the Banningcocks and the De Graeffs and the Tulps and the Sixes, organized through financing and intermarrying in a solid block impermeable to the accusations of a grubby little painter living now in poverty in a West Amsterdam allotment. They had successfully marginalized the one-time great and fashionable painter, squashed his lines of communication with the chattering classes, dried up his networking. And it could be said that the indictment in this painting had been the cause. They closed up the case. They could afford to continue to hang the painting in public for all intents and purposes, for they had successfully ruined the painter and smothered the indictment. It is imperative that we reopen the case.
The Benningcock conspirators knew that they were correctly indicted. And to hide their guilt, they revengefully embarked on a campaign to gradually destroy Rembrandt's wealth, reputation, and good fortune. To persuade the world that Rembrandt's celebrated group portrait of the Amsterdam militia was just an innocent painting of exuberant soldiers rallying for musket practice. Rembrandt, intelligent and perceptive man that he is, though a miller's son converted to an easy bourgeois, still stocking up his money like a peasant, trying to make friends in high places like a parvenu, still sleeping with his servants because he could not sleep with the women he aspired to be equal to. He knew otherwise.